Welcome, film industry professionals, film buffs, and aspiring filmmakers. I'm your host, Fernando Guillen, and our lovely co-host, Dana De La Camera. This is the Cinema Pathway TV show, presented by Paradoxical Films and brought to you by Cinevideotech. Join us on this journey behind the camera and, most importantly, beyond what we know about cinema and the craft of filmmaking and all its mysteries. So please, take a seat, grab a soda and some popcorn, and join us on this cinema road together, because we are the Cinema Pathway TV show. Welcome to the Cinema Pathway TV show. I am your host, Fernando Guillen, and today we want to welcome you to our new episode. We want to deep down into our beloved film craft, which has always been a film medium. Our guest is a master at this craft. We welcome you, Egon Stephan Jr. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Egon Stephan Jr. is a cinematographer and director of photography whose credits include the hit series DEXTER and BURN NOTICE. Feature films range from STRIPTEASE, Reality Bites, Passenger 57, and FLIGHT of the Navigator. He also works in numerous music videos for Janet Jackson, GLORIA ESTEFAN, Ricky Martin, CHRISTINA Aguilera, CELINE Dion, and others. Innovating himself moves into the future as a cinematographer and light chief engineer. Egon's goal in life is to give back to the film community. So after years of planning and preparations, his company, Cinevideotech, in association with Paradoxical Films, assemble a group of professionals from the film industry to bring you the finest of the best in what we call Tell Your Story, with excitement in the community. The first assemble of many master training workshop is called Crafting Cinematic Vision and Lighting Engineer, followed by Unveiling the Artistry with Bianca Graciani, a makeup artist, and many more. But let us tell you more about the life of a cinematographer and legend in the film community, promoting his new master training workshop, Crafting Cinematic Vision and Lighting Engineer, Egon Stephan Jr.
So Egon, let's start from the beginning. You grew up with your father, Egon Stephan Sr., who made films such as Passenger 57, Miami Blues, Police Academy 4, and Flight of the Navigator.
Also the camera operator on When We Were Kings with Muhammad Ali. Well, I grew up in the business. I mean, for a longest time, I thought my father was a truck driver because every time we were going on locations, we would be driving a truck, and didn't realize he was actually a cinematographer. And when he came over here from the war, he opened up a little facility that had like one camera and a little shop to repair things. And since he was German and he had connections in Germany, one of the first Aeroflex cameras to come to Florida, he went over there on a plane and hand carried on his lap to bring it over for a job. I think it was with Bill Graffet on one of the jobs. So we were doing, in back in the 60s, there's very few rental houses that would have all of that. So he would have a little bit of lighting, a little bit of grip, and some cameras and lenses, and then the ability to service things. So it was my backyard. I was every day running around the shop and seeing people prepping cameras. And then at some point he would just be taking me out on set and then giving me a chance to do the slate as in the camera department.
Did you ever ask any questions? Like, would he ever be like, hey, hold this camera?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, my father was pretty strict. He was the only child. So when he came down to like saying things, he would want you to really pay attention. If you weren't paying attention, he would sort of kind of like remind you to pay attention. A little intimidating at certain parts, but he meant always well. And he always would be helpful for anybody that would be young filmmakers that would come in, or they would need somebody to work out a shot or some type of a rig. He would open his doors and say, okay, let's figure this out. And, you know, people were putting cameras in airplanes and on rigs way before even today. So we all have the same like desire to put the camera in such a place that gives the audience a perspective, and he was really good at that. One of the things he was really known for is doing all the aerials and the opening sequences for movies that came into town. Since we were a Tyler dealer, I think we were the first Tyler representative for Tyler Camera Systems, and Nelson Tyler helped him learn how to fly for movies where you take the whole side of the helicopter off way before there were drones, and you would have to physically hang out the side of it, look almost like a gunner in Vietnam, and zoom in and film while you're going 100 miles an hour in a helicopter over the water. So he got known for doing a lot of that. And then he always needed a camera assistant. So I was picked as his camera assistant, even when I was like,
Which
really
river
young.
in a helicopter?
Oh yeah, actually there was the one that I was most scared about was I was 16 years old and we were doing a James Bond movie, second unit in Colombia, in Bogota, and then we went to Cartagena and we were doing this stunt sequence where the planes were going up and one actually hits the mountains, and we were in the helicopter. It was the only helicopter they could get was a Huey. So the whole side of the Hueys
Classic
are
Vietnam.
off. Oh yeah, and there was no seats, and it was just open, and I'm just holding onto something on the ground, and the actual stunt didn't go so right. And then when the plane comes over, all of a sudden you hear on the helicopter do 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 do, and it starts turning really weird. And
Were you in the helicopter?
Oh yeah, I was in the helicopter, and the plane actually hit something of the helicopter, I think the skid. And we kind of did a bobble, and then he said, land the helicopter. And he looked at me, he goes, get out. And he goes, if this goes down, I don't want us both to go down. So we landed on a mountaintop. He told me to get out of the helicopter, and then I just stood there and watched it. And when he needed it, in those days, there was always film. So you had to have somebody load mags. And at the time, I was loading mags in the helicopter, but I guess if he thought we were going to explode and die, he'd rather have me on the ground. So then every time he needed to load a mag, he'd come down. And that was the first time I ever got taught how to load mags. I didn't get taught that when I was in Miami. It's when I'm in Colombia, he hits me with, hey, you're going to be my assistant and you're going to load mags. I'm like, whoa. So in the hotel room, he's teaching me how to do this for the very next day. So the first two magazines I jammed by accident because I didn't know how to do it. But then by the end of the job, I was like...
This was as a kid, right?
Yeah, no, I just turned 16. So I was on set. I mean, he gave me the first camera he gave me to understand was a Bolex when I was 5, 6 years old. And that was in a still camera. He gave me a Nikon to say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do composition and lighting. And he'd give me these little missions like, here's 36 exposures. Go take vertical lines. Go give me vertical lines. And then I would go around the city and I would just try to do that. And then he would grade me and say, horrible, good, or not.
Did you understand that as a kid, or
No.
or was it
No.
like something like
sometimes
go get the water temples icon for Zelda or something like that?
Yeah, no, I
Or
didn't
was
get
it something like like you just went through it because like your father did it, right?
Yeah, well, he was trying to teach me something before because most of the time cameras, like a 35 millimeter film camera, is 24 frames in a second. So you're burning film, 400 feet of film or 1,000 feet of film. Now, he didn't want me to just start blowing film, so he would give me 36 in 36 exposures to go and spend a week trying to get these good pictures. And he would look at them afterwards, like he'd say sunrises and sunsets for a week. So I ran out every day for sunrise and sunsets and take pictures, and then we'd develop them, and he'd look at it and go, horrible angle, wrong lens, wrong position, bad flare. And he would be very critical of it. And then at some point in the game, I don't know when, but he was looking through them all, and I was anticipating him saying it's horrible. And he pulled one out and he would go, now this one doesn't suck. So that was more like saying that I did it good. It's like it didn't suck. So then I was hoping that.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, I was happy. I go, why do you like that one? Like, what? So he would tell me, and then I'd go, all right. So I would just try to do more of whatever that one was I did. And, I eventually got to the point where he says, okay, here's a 100-foot daylight spool. Now you can shoot 100 feet of film. And then after that, he would give me a 400-foot one, and then 1,000. And then, I don't know, working there every day, and then working under some of the, I consider masters of the business. They're my mentors. They're, some of them are doing major television shows and movies right now. And, I follow their work, and they were kind enough to, in the beginning of my career, I think I was a camera assistant for about 28 years. And that was my a lot of my schooling, working under a cinematographer that was a great person that has ASC behind their name. And then if you just shut up and pay attention, you start to see how they do what they do. And then you would go in and watch dailies and you'd be like amazed. And I would say, wow, I hope one day I can do something like that, because they knew their craft. And a lot of them came from still photography at some point that rolled over. But that's been my goal is to try to keep perfecting the craft. Because my dad, he was a funny guy. I didn't go to school for any of this.
Okay.
You know, the school was go to the shop and be there and learn from experience. So I would think that at the beginning I wanted to be in camera department, but he says you got to be a filmmaker. Because what he would do is he would go out to these different places by himself with a 16 millimeter camera, a Nagra tape recorder, and go into the jungles and film a documentary with nobody. And then come back and then develop it and edit it. And we at the time had film editing chems and
So do you think that between someone that knows about filmmaking and just having a camera just to go out there in the field, is there a difference? I mean,
you know what it is
because you had the experience of your father and you know, from your upbringing. How does that evolve into filmmaking actually?
Well, the more you know, the easier things get.
Okay.
And if you're only isolated, like if you're looking at this camera, you know, you're going to have a camera assistant that's going to build it, and you might be the director. You're not going to need to know everything about that camera, but he does. That guy does. So the more you know, if you're going to now be without a whole group of people, let's say you're going to go and do some National Geographic something, you still got to record sound and you still got to record video, and you might have maybe you and one other person, or maybe just you doing it. So knowing how to do that and doing it well, you have to light it yourself still. You have to put grip equipment and rig it somewhere. So if you're familiar with all the different departments and you come together as a whole, where the thing always starts off with the story. I mean, if you have, nobody comes to me and says, I want to shoot a piece of shit. They always say, I want the best thing I'm going to do. And it starts with your story. So how well the story is and how well you can align the people with, then you can then get the right equipment and the right version of how to shoot it.
Have you ever had that experience where the screenplay has a tone and everyone else in the department is not in tune with that?
Well, I would say if I had to take from all the years of experience of working in a rental house and then working on the sets and working under different people, my super skill is I look at everything through like a photographic visual eye. I walk around all the time with a light meter that I measure nature and the way the light is, so that if I have to recreate it one time on camera, I know the values. So when it comes down to me being on the set, it's a collaborative experience. I mean, it's a lot of work. You know, when I was a kid, my dad would put me in the Boy Scouts. I was like one away from getting Eagle Scout. But, you know, it's always talking about being prepared and doing your homework. And the more you do the homework before you go on the set is the fun part. All the work before and all the work after is what it comes down to. So communication is really key. There's many times that I'll get a director that I work with and they'll have a certain vision.
In any relationship, communication is key, man.
And I want to give that vision to that person, but then you have restraints sometimes of budgets or resources to do it in. So over the years,
does that add to the pressure?
Yeah, no, sure, obviously. But then if you have enough options and variables, you could try to still get something close to what they're wanting. And then sometimes I ask them to give me references to movies or paintings or music or something, or like a mood board or something, so I can see what you call, let's say if you say I want to do cinema verite. Well, I have my version of what that is, but I want to know what your version is. So if you give me examples of that, then I can get in your head and I can understand we speak the same language. And if we don't, then I make the modifications so that we do. So if I'm saying I'm reading a script and I'm at this point, I'm seeing the movie in my head as I'm reading the script. A version of a movie in my head, and I write little notes next to it. And then when we go to the director and we do a table read or something, then I'm going to share it with that and say, hey, I was thinking about this moment, that we do a little close up of the eye with that reaction or something of that nature that wasn't even in the script, but it could heighten the moment of that scene and make it memorable. And I try to offer that up. And if the person I'm working with doesn't like it, sometimes they'll let me do one my way and then we do it the rest of the other way, or we just don't do it my way and we just do it that way. So it's not one way to skin that cat. I mean, we're filmmakers. Filmmakers is like it's an art to be able to just take an idea and then run out with your friends and then get some money together and create this thing that could be thousands and thousands of people seeing it, and something could resonate so much. It could be like some of these cult films like Rocky Horror Picture Show. You know, I'm sure on the set when you were filming that, a lot of people were thinking like, what am I doing here? But 30 years later, and it's still being played in movie theaters, and even more after that time.
We'll be right back with our crafting cinematic vision and lighting engineer, Egon Stephan Jr. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Tell Your Story. It is a masterclass hands-on workshop that is presented by Cinevideotech and brought to you by Paradoxical Films. Crafting cinematic vision and lighting engineers with the instructor, Mr. Egon Stephan Jr. You will learn how to work with actual film, 16mm, Super 16mm, 35mm, and film cameras. In addition, how to load them and change magazines. Furthermore, the workshop will prepare you on how and what it takes to work on set as a first or second assistant camera, the fundamentals of lighting, and the pathway to becoming a director of photography. Furthermore, coming soon, Unveiling the Artistry, a mastering of makeup techniques with the uber-talented special effects makeup artist, Bianca Graciani. She will enrich your knowledge and techniques with professional tools that are implemented in the film industry, commercials, and more. For information about the classes and updates, everything will be posted on our website at www.paradoxicalfilms.com/tellyourstory.
All right, Egon, so I know this is a very special thing for you and your team that you've been working so hard to make it happen, and I'm very honored to be part of it. So what can you tell us about Tell Your Story?
So for many, many, many years, my dad opened up Cinevideotech in 1968. And we've had thousands of people that have come through the doors that have worked for us or been interns or in some way or another been involved in that. And through that, it was always about passing on your knowledge. That was something my father he was very gracious with people. Some people, when you become very good at something, you don't want to pass it on to somebody else because of fear of that they get old and then you take my job. So there's always this kind of hoarding of, I'll give you some information, but not all of it so that I'm valuable to you still. But my dad was the opposite. He was like, look, if you're willing to put in the time, I'm willing to teach you whatever it is. And some people would last years at the company and some people would last jobs and job after job.
All right, folks, take a look.
The art of storytelling has been around since the beginning of time, whether through oral traditions or by cave drawings. But one thing has been consistent, is the balance between light and shadow and images are important to then convey information for others by capturing a moment in time. And the first film that was actually being made was 8mm, but then progressed to Super 8, 16, Super 16, 35, the Super 35, 65 to 70mm. As time went on, that became a bigger canvas for us to capture big vistas and those moments. The first cameras were something simple like this, that were in a box with a little hole on it that you would hand crank it. Not so far unlike the one that my father would give me when I was 5 years old, which was a Bolex. And it was a hand crank with a wind-up. He had originally been a cinematographer, so he was passing on a torch for me. Immediately I went out and got film without really knowing what I was doing, without even a light meter, with something that was inside that just would move up and down for exposure. And I would go out and film everything from lizards to sunrise to sunsets, glass breaking and whatnot. And then I was excited that I'd take it over to the lab and you'd have to wait many days for it to come back. When it came back, we would take a white sheet in the house, and we would take a projector, thread it up, and we'd watch that. After watching that, I was hooked. That was something that I preserved as a moment of time that I loved, something that was an emotion from me. And then through experiences and times, I asked my father, and through my own trials and tribulations, discovered different techniques on which I could make it better than just a single image. Anybody can do a single image. It's how do you make that image look really pretty? And how do you actually convey that to other people to see it? So why so many cameras? So many options? because every one of these do something different. There was a progression from the very first ones to what they became into. Originally, we were using this. This is like for Super 8 for home movies. After we've migrated from this in 16 millimeter, we went to the ARRI S. This was 100-foot daylight spools and 400-foot loads that was used also during World War II to see the footage that we have available. That camera then morphed to an ARRI M that then morphed to the ARRI 16 SR, and the model that came after this one was the 416. In MOS, we have the original 2C that then eventually turned into one of the still last production models of 35, which is the 235. The Movie Cam Compact turned into the ARRI Cam. The stable horse of the industry, the ARRI 3, became the 435, and then digital, 8K and beyond. We have the ARRI Alexa. This is one model. All these are nothing without the special glass and lighting to make it so that you can tell your story. Not all cameras are created equal. Some do certain things, some doesn't. In this case, we have an ARRI 2C, 35 millimeter, that in the time was revolutionary because it was small. In this configuration, this is in studio mode. But the small amount of weight that allows you to get into tight places made this camera very popular. By changing this to have a PL mount front and a very simple viewing system, as you can see, made this camera very popular to certain filmmakers. Some of the movies that were shot with this is the fight sequences in Raging Bull, A Clockwork Orange, and Star Wars: A New Hope. This one has been modified to actually have hand crank to simulate over and under exposure and double exposure. This takes a 200-foot magazine, a 400-foot magazine, and it can be configured into very small to fit into the backseat of a car. One of the last production model cameras that Aeroflex made was a system called ARRI Cam. They came out with the ARRI Cam Studio and the ARRI Cam Lite. This is after all the years of everything that they've learned, they've put it into a camera system. This particular camera system was something that was taken from Movie Cam, and they were bought out and then adapted to this system. This has a full, beautiful optical system. It has all speed controls that you can do pretty much anything your little heart desires. You have another feature on it. This particular is a sound camera, while the other one, the 435, is an MOS camera. You can record sound on that, but you only have the ability of doing up to 60 frames a second, which is not dialogue anyway. So it's a very quiet camera, configured in many different ways. You can be top-loaded, back-loaded, all types of different type of magazines can fit on this to make it where also the optical system can be removed completely, and 100% video tap can be put on that for doing it for Steadicam and in a low mode. One of the neat features of doing in-camera effects is with this particular camera with this little box. This little box does something by taking the timing of how the film is being pulled down and the shutter and throwing them out of phase. The effect that's given is a smear effect, and it looks like something that is totally organic that you control by turning the dial, and you have a jitter button. So if you wanted to see something fall into frame and the world shake on cue, you can press this little button, and as you press it, the frame jumps. There's not another camera that has that ability to do that. As you can see on the back, it's a fully modular system. Every piece that goes onto that as an accessory easily attaches and removes depending on the desired effect that you want to do. Some people want it very lightweight and they take off all of that. But if you're going to be doing speed controls or you're going to be syncing up, as this is a film camera, a 35mm camera, If you're going to be syncing this up to a TV set or to a projector, you have to have a way that sync pulses to that so that you don't get the running line that you see on most things that are like a CMOS chip where you're seeing a TV effect that comes down like that. This type of boxes allow you to go past that and to freeze the bar and to either move it at the top or the bottom or just out of the frame. All sorts of accessories are for this. You have a handheld accessory, you have small little monitors for camera operators to see quickly, and you have everything from the best of all the cameras to this day have been integrated into this particular model. One of the cameras here that is very unique is this one. This is a 435 ARRI. This particular camera has the ability to go from 1 frame to 150 frames a second. It has an integrated shutter, very bright optical system, an integrated video tap, and with this attachment, which is an RCU, that gives you the ability to either select frame rates or select shutter angle or select what they call ramping. Ramping gives you the ability to take from one frame rate to another frame rate, and the shutter integrates in there so that there's no change in exposure when you make that happen. Some of the other features on this camera, it's very robust, very strong, and it has attachments to change it from this mode to that mode. This type of camera would be considered an MOS camera, mit-out sound. It's a German expression that you cannot record dialogue with it because it's very loud and noisy. Some of the features on this allows it to be lightweight. And still, if you wanted to do dialogue, normally you would put it further away with a longer lens and maybe put some furniture pads in front of it to done it. Or sometimes you would put a Barney on it in those type of cases. But if you were doing full dialogue, you would be going to a different model camera that's more specific for that. This particular mode is sacrificing now the speed of the camera to a time-lapse model. So you can control 1 frame a second for intervals of every 30 seconds, every 60 seconds. Both of these this camera actually is the workhorse of the industry. It was used for anything from high-speed photography for fight scenes, high-speed food or product stuff, cars, ramping sequences from 1 frame rate to slow it down, like in Sherlock Holmes or other movies where you see at the last moment everything slow down to 150. And for things in this case, when you're doing sunrise and sunsets for the beginning of movies, you're having title sequences, you wanted to have it being in time lapse. This particular module attached to this camera allows you to do that. They've made housings for this to be able to go underwater, splash housings. And then sometimes we put a little blimp or a Barney that would try to deaden the noise for it. But most of the time it was considered as just not running dialogue and still being able to go and have high speed. Stay tuned. Coming up next, optics and lenses.
Well, Egon, thank you so much. I am totally hooked with your wisdom. If you want to know more about the Paradoxical Films / Tell Your Story, please log into our website and stay tuned to us and the Crafting Cinematic Vision and Lighting Engineer with Egon Stephan Jr. We'll be right back. We want to take this moment to thank our partners that helped us make this show possible. Cinevideotech has provided film equipment, training, and rental services inside and outside the United States since 1968. Theatrical Productions offers consulting, productions, and rental services in Central and South America for a wide range of films, advertising, marketing, commercial projects, and more. Art Accelerator is a non-profit organization that helps emerging artists accelerate their careers through film classes and film industry networking events. Welcome back, Cinema Pathway enthusiasts. As an actor, I'm very excited because as a filmmaker, you give life to film through lenses, and it's a language that we see, but we don't quite understand. So can you tell us a little bit about what are the viewers going to see in Tell Your Story through the lenses in your workshop?
Well, when we did the other workshops before on the lenses, we actually brought out almost every lens I had. And you could be at that for days. And that's just the ones I had. You know, there's many other people in town that have other lenses that I don't even have. So they go down the lens rabbit hole. it's vast, just like on the cameras. There's many different options of different cameras, and they're making them every 6 months. Another camera comes out with another model number of something where people don't want to use the older model. They want to use a newer one. And can I give you an example? Some of them are high-speed lenses so that you can shoot in very low light. Some of them are very super long lenses that are maybe 5 feet long that go on a camera. And then you have to have a certain rig with it to be able to operate it correctly. You know, some are really tiny, some are really long, some are really big, some are really wide. There's so many options that in Tell the Story, I wanted to give these options to people like crayons. Like, these are things that you draw with. You know, why would you choose that over another? Until you put them up and see the characteristics of them and make notes of them, will you know where to place them in your projects or your story that you're telling.
So in Tell Your Story, if you compare it to traditional film school that will take maybe a year and a half of a course, for example, what will be the difference between Tell Your Story and that prestigious film school that takes a year and a half?
So yes, there's a good point for that. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to fast track you. I don't want to give you theory of film. I don't want to give you homework to watch movies and stuff. That all you can do on your own. What I'm trying to do is give you the practical, hands-on experience of gear. Taking a lens on and off, handing it to a person to put it on a camera, cleaning it, maintaining it. This is all things that have to be taught. Because if you put that in wrong and you chip the back element, that could be $20,000 as a mistake. That could be an insurance claim. If you drop the lens, it could be an insurance claim. These are all important. If you put your fingerprint on the front of it and it has oily from your skin, you just can't take your shirt and rub it off. You know, you got to use a special cloth that won't scratch the coating.
And those little details,
you got to learn it somewhere, and they're not going to teach you in the school.
They're not going to teach you in the school.
No.
That's what I'm saying.
No, they're not
going to teach you in the school, guys.
No, because you
can pay $5,000 and it's not going to teach you.
Well, no, but you'll learn a lot of other things. You know, that's why I'm saying is what I'm trying to do is not ever going to replace any school ever. Consider it more like a VOTech finishing school, where let's say you've gone and you've graduated and you think that, you know, you're motivated to do your project. Now you need to play with the real toys that we use, because maybe what you learned in school was all they had available for you, and now you come out and realize there's 50 cameras to choose from. There's 1,000 lenses to choose from. Well, you didn't learn that in school, so now you got to learn it. You're still learning. Like I like it when every day I learn something new, even at my age, because I don't have all the answers. And I watch everybody pushing the envelope. So I learn as I go too. There'll be jobs that I didn't learn anything and I feel like I'm hired from the neck down and I'm just a piece of meat. But when I'm not, I can happily say, today I learned something, or today I learned what not to do, or today I learned by accident what really looked cool, and I'm going to do it again and again. But that happens by touching it, experiencing it, taking your notes, and taking it very seriously. I have some people that come in and say, you know, I learned more with you in one day than I had in all school. And I go, yeah, because I'm just teaching the practical stuff. I'm teaching the stuff that's going to get you paid. I'm teaching the stuff of how to act so that you'll get hired for the next job. I'm teaching you the responsibilities that come with the job that you say yes to. Because everybody can say, yes, I want that job. But if you don't follow the responsibilities that come with that, then you're a poser. And you only can pose for so long before somebody can see right through your BS and say, no, you're not really the right person I want for the job. I consider the lenses, they all have a certain personality. They're made by different manufacturers. Some of them are from England, some of them are from France, some of them are from Germany. And they all have their own unique formula of what they use as coatings on the glass. Some the vintage lenses are uncoated. So for a person who doesn't understand what that means, the more of a special coating you have on that, it handles flares of light or skin tones a certain way, and they are like crayons to me, because you have the little box that has 6, and then you have the 100 box. The 100 box is what I consider like all the different types of glass. Now, as a photographer or a cinematographer, you are going to learn about lenses. There's not just one option. A 50 millimeter lens is not equally on all the manufacturers and all the years of anybody making a 50. You have different versions of things. Now with today's technology, with 8K and all the resolutions we have, the lenses are becoming more optimized for these cameras. So if you were to take a lens that was specifically designed for a video HD camera, it might not be the same way on other HD video cameras, because each one of them processes this image in a certain way. You have pixels on a chip, and those pixels are all lined up in a certain way. How that light hits that, a Canon might respond a certain way with a look, and if you put right next to it a Sony, and you put right next to it an Alexa and a Red and a Blackmagic, even though that they're all going to be recording maybe in their RAW format, RAW is still, per manufacturer, a way of capturing an image that doesn't mean it's going to be the same as a film camera. A film camera, like in the cameras that we have in the front here, these are made back before I was even born. And what we've did here is we've modified them so that today's technology and today's lenses and today's ability, you can still use these cameras, even though that they weren't designed for that back in the day. We've made certain modifications, because like some of these are Super 16 and some of these are Super 35. Well, this is just regular 35. So regular 35 is a 4:3 aspect ratio, sort of like the old TVs that were square or kind of like a little bit curved. That's the center of an image. When the technology started realizing that you could use more, and you were no longer putting audio onto the film, because back in the day, the left side used to be able to put a magnetic strip along where the perfs were, and you would be putting the audio right onto the film. Now they've separated that. We don't have to do that anymore. The audio is recorded separately, and you time code and jam sync and gen lock things, and now you're able to use that kind of a system. So when you're picking lenses, you can't just say, I like Cooke lenses, and it works for everything, because I put some Cookes on certain cameras and it's not so pretty. And then I put other lenses on there, and they are. So I would say an optical, when choosing lenses, testing is really important. And anything that I've ever done that meant anything, there was many days of testing. They would do film tests, they would do lens tests, they would do makeup tests. They would do tests to make sure that optically this is what's going to be the best image that they're going to be getting for the story and for the director telling the story. So there's many versions. There are prime lenses, there's super wide angle lenses, there's specialty lenses that can get like your eyeball or in a small place like a probe or a prism. And then there's different versions. There's versions of Cookes from like the Cooke Series 1 all the way to, I think they're like Cooke 7s now. And each series, when they coat these optical glass, the metals and the composition that maybe was done with the Cooke S4s are not going to be the same as the Cooke S5s, because the S5 or the X6, they don't necessarily have the availability of that formula of coating. So they came up with a different one. So in doing that, it comes to a test. You're testing in things in low light, you're testing things in super high light, you're testing the color of rendition, you're testing how, if it's sharp to the edges or not, which back in the day would have been a mistake. Today we might embrace it as being something cool, new, and different. When the lens manufacturers, when they first made anamorphic lenses, they weren't very fast, meaning that the aperture wouldn't open that far. So you'd have to have bigger lights. And those bigger lights and those lenses actually was more expensive in the budget. On the other side of the spaghetti westerns, they were shooting everything, instead of being in 4-perf, they were shooting in 2-perf tetoscope. And they were using spherical lenses to achieve an anamorphic image which is a 240 aspect ratio from edge to edge.
Anamorphic sounds very technical.
Yeah, well, it's you notice that TVs became rectangle.
Yes.
The chips became rectangle. The film cameras are still a square that is oversized for let's say called open gate. You see more than what you're getting, and then you're shooting through a ground glass that gives you the markings where you know how to frame your shot. So if you're shooting in 16:9 for television, you would have marking lines that show you where if you go over or below that, you're going to miss certain things in it.
When you look at a script, like the film crew, like, do you determine what type of lens is going to be used?
Well, then
based on the scene?
it talks about if you have the budget, because when you go for anamorphic and the bigger cameras, you're going to be spending a lot more money than if you do it with just a spherical lens like this. The choice of whether you shoot it in anamorphic or not, maybe the story wants to be in big vistas, and maybe you are going to be somewhere like in Montana and you want to see edge to edge, and that would be something that would be great to be done in anamorphic, for instance. Now, anamorphic also handles light flares differently. You get this little blue streak, or you get this little anomaly that in the days of making anamorphics, they try to not let that happen.
Does
not
that
let it breathe too weird.
Does that influence in the genre of the film?
Sure. Let's say if I'm going to pull focus to you and the whole image shifts while I'm doing that, that might give you as an audience viewer a little disturbance. So they would make improvements on that. It wouldn't do that. But then sometimes as a creative effect, and you know about that could happen, you might say, I want this scene and I want to use it with this series of anamorphics because it's going to give me that look or that feel that we want.
At Cinema Pathway TV, we are committed to bring value to you and our film community as we explore the craft of filmmaking around the world. Also, visit us online at www.paradoxicalfilms.com/shop, where you can purchase Paradoxical Films and Cinema Pathway gear such as hoodies, t-shirts, hats, stickers, and more. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at cinema_pathway_podcast for behind-the-scenes footage, photos, and more.
So there's a lot of instinct that comes into play when you go to film school instead of just like the basics of what they teach you?
Well, in film school, you're not going to have access to all these lenses. I mean, some of these lenses are $20,000 to $40,000 a piece. And some of the ones that we rent out are anywhere between $500,000 for a set of lenses. So a school's never going to have that.
Dude.
So they're only going to have the option of maybe CP, Canon CPs, or zines.
Is that worldwide?
Most likely, because if you had all that money to buy that kind of lenses, I think you'd be renting them out to recap your money versus trying to teach it in a film. So certain companies, like let's say Panavision, you can't buy their cameras and you can't buy their lenses. You can only rent them. And they design and make certain things for their specifications. Now, Arri, Zeiss, Canon, Cook, this is an Optex on this other one, all these different ones, you can buy them for sure. Now the series, whether they are rare or not, and the options as you go more onto the scale of master primes and you're going up higher than the series of this, you're going to probably rent a lens for maybe $500 a day for a lens. One of my Optimo zoom lenses is like $600 a day just for a lens, not a whole lot of lenses, a lens.
Wow.
Now you can go and you can rent cheaper lenses that would be a whole series of lenses for maybe a couple of $100. But the quality of what you're going to see versus the lens that they spent that much money to design on an MTF computer, it's always going to be better than something that you can buy for a couple of $1,000.
So that comes into the budget when you're trying to make a film?
Absolutely. So, if they don't have that tight budget, you're not going to be able to get the most expensive lenses to put on that. You're going to have to get something that will fit your budget. And if it's something that's very important that you need that look, then that's the battle that you work with the director and the producer to somehow cut something else in order to add that thing in there, because you want to give the tools of the creative person the best possible way to paint that picture. And that's when, people will buy any camera and any lens, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be as good as the person who knows what lenses and cameras that match well. And they learn that from experience and by looking at it and by seeing different movies. And you can look up and find out what lenses they used, what camera do they use. Do they shoot that in film or do they shoot that in video, and which one do they do, and what was the process of post that they did. Everybody can look that up and find. That's what I could do myself to teach myself, is to, like Wes Anderson style. He has a style, just like Michael Bay has a style.
Absolutely.
Just like, you name any of these, Spike Lee, they all have a style. And they're known for certain things that they do in their style. They have learned what those things do, like paintbrushes, because they will request that maybe we shoot this and that or another. And if the cameraman has a different idea, he will go into the rental house. He will do a few days of prep or maybe a few weeks of prep, depending on how big the job is. And then everybody that's involved in that process will look at the image and say, do we like it? I mean, does it look good? Or does the people's faces look a little distorted? Because when you change lenses, your face or objects will distort a certain way.
Absolutely.
You have a portrait lens that is more true to what you see with your eye. And that could be anywhere between like a 75 or an 85, and it's a portrait, and you're a certain feet away, maybe 7 feet away, and that's what they would consider as a portrait. Now, I can do a 14 millimeter and move in closer, but your head will be a little bit bigger. You'll be a little more distorted. The straight lines that are around might bow a little bit because of the glass being wider. So if I went further back and I put a 100 millimeter or a 200 millimeter, all the background will go out of focus and you will look more compressed. So it kind of gives you that feeling, if we were hearing you give a line and I was far away, I'm almost like a voyeur looking at something, and it gives a certain emotion while you're watching. The things that they don't teach you in film school, which I can tell you right off the bat, is one thing is they don't teach you set etiquette, because they haven't had enough time, whoever's teaching it, to know what is the standard operating procedures. What is the protocol? You can't, for instance, let's say you're a gripper in electric and something's not going right. You don't run to the director and start freaking out. No, there's a chain of commands of his boss that then handles it a certain way,
like the military,
and at a certain time. Now, when you're going to be involved in building something, you don't block the main walkway where everybody has to go through. I mean, these things are common sense, but
common sense is not that common.
It's not common. And also you haven't been taught that there are protocols that you do. And one of them, especially if you're a camera assistant next to the camera, if the actor is right in its eye line and you're doing this and looking around, you will disrupt them, and they might say, please, will you pull focus on the opposite side of the camera so I don't get distracted by you? Or let's say you were the loader and you were standing there on the set and you can't help but watch the scene, and then the actor, it's right in his eye line, and he's going to yell at you, get out of my eye line because you're messing me up. These are things you don't learn unless you were on the set and somebody showed you that this is the protocol. So that's a big one. Also, preparation, what you need to do, like decisions you make happen before you go and rent anything and before you show up on the set. Some people just want to make a buck and they're hustling, so they got a camera, a couple of lenses, and it's considered good enough. But when you want to up your game to try to be different from the next person, you have to master certain things of knowing how to use the tools. And that's what we're trying to do with Tell a Story, is to give people a platform that you don't just have one option of a piece of lens. You have like lenses that are made in the 40s, made in the 30s, made in the 70s, maybe in the 80s. Some of the lenses I have, they don't even make them anymore. And when you marry them with the right camera, with the right project that you're doing, you're going to stand out. It's not just, I have $2,000 for a camera and lens package. It's like those decisions would be, why do you want to get this over another one? And the cameraman will give examples and show the director, and maybe they'll agree on it. And then they find a way to make that work, because everybody's making lenses. I mean, especially as the cameras are getting bigger and bigger with the chip, they had originally, like this camera up here has a mount on the front. This is called a BNCR mount. That's a very large mount to accept a big image. Then it went to PL mount. And after PL mount, now we have LPL, which is large PL, which is almost the size of that one again, because it needs to be optically covering that chip edge to edge. I can take these old film cameras and I can put all of them side by side with the exact same film stock with the exact same lens, and they will look exactly the same. I can put video cameras all in a row and they're not all going to respond the same way, because you can buy a camera from Blackmagic for a couple of $1,000s, or you can spend $65,000 and buy an Alexa, or even more if you're going to buy Red Raptor or a Sony Venice, and you can be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on things. These cameras, not these here, but other ones that I have, in the day, they were about $150,000 a piece. Now, because film is not as big as digital, you can buy them on eBay for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, when in the day we spent $150,000 for each one. And the value of them drops down, because I think the only way to really do projects before was with a film camera. Now there's so many different options, it matches to the budget. So your end product will only be as good as what you use to film it with, because there's no magical something in post. You can do a lot of things in post, and a lot of things I learned in post, I don't make it a big deal on set to worry about. Like if there's a C-stand or a flag, it's like, we'll blur it out. We'll just erase it later. Or I'll spend 20 minutes on the set trying to make it perfect.
All right, folks, take a look.
Welcome to Cinevideotech's Lens Setup. Here you have many options of lenses to choose from to best tell your story. Lenses are the window to the soul. It's the directors' and cinematographers' eyes that convey emotion and visual style. Through their choices, it puts the audience in perspectives that they wouldn't have had before. Think of these lenses as personalities. Some are fat, some are not. Some are fast, some are slow. Some are long, as you see, and some do interesting things of putting the camera where they would normally not be. As a cinematographer, there are certain lenses that over the years I tend to gravitate towards. Cooke S4s, Optimo zooms, and vintage 20-100 zoom lens. This lens is made by Cooke. It has great characteristics of flares. It's been one of Stanley Kubrick's lens he uses for Barry Lyndon. This series that we have all in 35mm, also we have it for Super 16. Some of the same coatings that we use for this particular lens, which would be a Super 16 lens, 11.5 to 138, has the same characteristics as a 25 to 250 HR and 35mm version. These are some of the things that I use to go to. Along with the many options of cameras, we have lenses. In this particular case, we have a Cooke S4. This is a prime lens. The flare is very nice, and it has a very warm skin tone. It looks very good on people. The Optimo series, they're not as warm, they're more cool, but they blend well between the two of them. This is a 15 to 40, used for Steadicam and handheld versus its bigger brother, which is a 24 to 290. This is at wide open at 2.8 at 290, is a focus puller's nightmare, but it's a very beautiful lens. This is 290mm to 24. The option of lenses that you have available to you is chosen by the director and the cinematographer after doing extensive tests. Every lens has a slight difference to it, like personalities. Some of them are warm, some of them are cool, some of them are fast, high-speed lenses, some of them are slowed lenses. Some of them, in this case, would be an 8mm fisheye, all the way up past an 800mm lens. Depending on what the director and the DP are trying to achieve, you pick the right lens for it. At different times, you'll have a dolly in and a dolly out, or you might have a zoom in with a dolly out to create that kind of vertigo effect that we've seen before. The different manufacturers choose their coatings and their style of their lens to flare or not flare and to create something different from one another. Some of them are high-speed lenses, some of them are slow. Some of them are very long, and some of them are very short and very wide. We have everything from lenses that are in an 8mm to a 10, all the way up to a 600, 800, and above. Some lenses are zoom lenses. Some lenses are prime lenses. Some of them are variable prime lenses. Options like this create more of an abstract idea for the director. You can selectively focus or not focus the scene to have the audience pay attention to just what you want to see. These are called swing and tilts. As cameras progressed, so did lenses. The first mounts for certain cameras was an Airy mount. It then progressed to a bayonet mount. As the format of the cameras increased to Super 35, they went to a PL mount, which means positive lock. This became the universal mount that we still use today. To use these vintage lenses, you would use a PL mount adapter. This particular lens is a Cooke Series 3, and this is a 4. You can see how the differences are over time. Over here we have a bayonet mount, regular 16 and regular 35. We then progressed up to PL mount, positive lock. This only happened because as we got more of the frame and wanted to cover for 16:9, we definitely had to have a wider opening on the back of the lenses. Today we have even full frame lenses that are even larger than this. As we went along, the coatings of these lenses, and some of these are vintage, the minerals and the metals that were used for that in the processing is no longer available. So whatever was made then is a certain look, and that's why people decide to go in certain ways like this. The two equivalents of this being a classic Cooke zoom versus the 16 version, both of them match almost identical. In this case, we have a 25-250 HR, which was a standard of the industry, and its equivalent would be this 16 zoom, which is also an HR. Both in color temperature and in fabricating almost look identical on screen. Over here we have a 600mm lens that back in the day was used like a steering wheel to pull its focus. The operator would pull its focus and not a camera assistant. Later, with modifications and the use of follow focus and zoom controls and standardized matte box and rod systems, we went to a converted 150-600 as you see here. Here is a 17-102 zoom lens, another great lens of the day, Angenieux vintage, that then later on progressed into the Optimo series. As you can see, they're pretty big boys. And then we have again vintage Cooke. This is a 20-100 Cooke zoom, very popular back in the day. And then it's equivalent to Super 16, almost identical, and the range would be 18-100. The only difference between these two is one was for Super 35. Stay tuned. Coming up next, lighting.
Wow, that was intense. Thank you for staying tuned with our craft in cinematic vision and lighting engineer, Egon Stephan Jr. at a Cinema Pathway TV show. lights out.